Welcome to our deep dive into a concept that might just change the way you view the world, antifragility.
Ah,
We're exploring Nassim Taleb's thought-provoking book, Antifragile, and our mission is to help you grasp what it means, why it matters, and how you can actually use these ideas in your own life.
oh,
So let's jump right in. Have you ever considered that some things actually benefit from a bit of stress and chaos?
it's a fascinating idea, isn't it?
Yeah,
We're not talking about enjoying rush hour traffic, of course.
right.
Taleb is referring to systems that actually grow stronger when exposed to volatility, randomness, and even setbacks.
That's what he calls anti-fragile, right?
Yeah,
And he distinguishes this from just being robust.
exactly. Taleb uses a three-part framework: fragile, robust, and anti-fragile. Think of the mythical Hydra every time a head is cut off, two more grow back.
Oh, wow.
That's anti-fragile. It doesn't just withstand shocks, it gains from them.
Okay, so not just bouncing back, but getting better because of the challenge. What about the fragile and robust parts of that framework?
Well, imagine a house of cards fragile.
The slightest breeze and it collapses.
Okay.
Robust is more like a stone wall.
Yeah.
It can withstand a lot of force, but it's not really changing or improving. Anti-fragile, on the other hand, is constantly evolving and adapting, becoming stronger through challenges.
So, this idea that we can actually benefit from disorder, is that just some philosophical concept or is there real world evidence to support it?
Taleb's work is deeply rooted in real-world observation and scientific evidence. One of the key concepts he explores is hormesis, the idea that small doses of stress can actually be beneficial. Think about vaccines, for example.
You're giving your body a little bit of the virus to build up its defenses, right?
Exactly. Or think about exercise. Putting your muscles under stress leads to growth and increased strength. There's a whole range of biological processes that benefit from this kind of calculated exposure to stress.
That's pretty amazing. So, how does this idea of hormesis actually connect to antifragility in a broader sense? Well, if you think about it, exposing ourselves to small doses of stress and disorder allows us to adapt, evolve, and become more resilient. It's like building up an immunity to the unexpected.
Okay, that makes sense. But isn't there a risk that things can go too far?
Hmm.
Where's the line between a healthy challenge and something that could actually break us?
That's a crucial question, and this is where Taleb introduces the idea of the Procrustean bed, the danger of trying to force everything into a rigid, predefined structure.
I'm not familiar with that one. Break that down for me.
In Greek mythology, Procrustes was an innkeeper who had a bed that he insisted all guests fit into perfectly.
Okay.
If they were too tall, he'd chop off their legs; too short, he'd stretch them out.
Yikes. That's a bit gruesome.
Right. The point is that by trying to eliminate all variation and randomness, we often create systems that are extremely vulnerable to unexpected events.
Okay.
And this plays out in so many areas of modern life.
Like our reliance on overly complex financial models that failed to predict the 2008 crisis.
Exactly. Or our healthcare system's over reliance on medication, which can suppress natural immune responses and create unintended consequences.
So by trying to control everything, we actually end up making things more fragile.
Precisely. Taleb argues that instead of trying to eliminate all risk and volatility, we should focus on building systems and ourselves to be anti-fragile. And one of the most powerful tools for doing this is what he calls optionality.
Okay, let's unpack this optionality concept.
Yeah.
What does that really mean in a practical sense?
Think of it like this: you have more options, more paths available to you, so you're not locked into any single outcome.
Okay.
This reduces your downside risk while also increasing your potential upside.
So instead of putting all your eggs in one basket, you're spreading your bets and creating more potential for success.
Exactly. A classic example of this is Taleb's barbell strategy, where you combine a very safe and stable approach with something more risky and high potential.
So like having a secure job, but also pursuing a side hustle you're passionate about. You're covered if things go wrong with the risky venture, but have huge upside potential if it takes off.
You got it. And that applies to so many areas of life, from investments to career choices to even personal relationships.
Okay, so how do we actually cultivate this optionality in our lives? I mean, it's easy to say have more options, but where do we even start?
Well, it starts with being aware of the concept and actively looking for opportunities to create more options for yourself.
Yep.
And that might involve stepping outside of your comfort zone, taking calculated risks, and being open to new possibilities.
It sounds like it requires a certain mindset shift, a willingness to embrace uncertainty and to view challenges as opportunities.
Absolutely. And it's about understanding that failure is not the opposite of success. It's
Yeah.
often a necessary part of the process. That's where Taleb's critique of what he calls teleological thinking comes in, this idea that everything happens for a reason we can neatly understand.
So instead of trying to fit everything into a neat narrative, we should be more focused on experimenting and adapting based on what actually happens.
Exactly. It's about embracing trial and error, making mistakes, learning from them, and constantly adjusting our approach. That's how we build true anti-fragility.
This reminds me of the Lindy effect you mentioned earlier. Can you
Yeah.
remind our listeners what that is?
Of course, the Lindy effect is this fascinating idea that the longer something has survived, whether it's a technology, an idea, a book, or even a restaurant, the longer it's likely to last.
So basically, the things that have stood the test of time are probably more robust and anti-fragile.
Precisely. It's a valuable heuristic for making decisions. Look for the things that have endured, that have proven their worth over time.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all ties together, but how can we actually apply this concept of anti-fragility in our own lives?
Yeah.
I mean, what are some concrete steps we can take to become more anti-fragile?
Well, one of the most powerful things you can do is to reduce your exposure to fragilities. Taleb calls this via negativa, the art of subtraction. It's about identifying the things in your life that are making you vulnerable and then eliminating them.
So it's not about adding more and more to our lives, but about simplifying decluttering and focusing on what's truly essential.
Exactly. And this applies to everything from your possessions to your commitments to your relationships. By reducing your exposure to fragilities, you're automatically making yourself more anti-fragile.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like clearing out the dead wood to make space for new growth.
It is. And another key step is to embrace randomness and variability. This might sound counterintuitive, but Taleb argues that by intentionally exposing ourselves to small doses of stress and disorder, we can actually make ourselves stronger.
This goes back to that hormesis concept we talked about earlier, the idea that small doses of stress can be beneficial.
Right. It could be as simple as taking a cold shower, trying a new workout routine, taking on a challenging project at work, or even just being open to new experiences and perspectives. It's about stepping outside of your comfort zone and embracing the unknown.
Okay, so reducing fragilities and embracing randomness, that's a great start. But what about this optionality idea? How can we create more options for ourselves in a practical sense?
Well, one way is to think about your career like a portfolio of investments. Instead of putting all your energy into one single path, consider diversifying your skills, your income streams, and your networks.
So instead of just relying on a single job, maybe you also have a side hustle freelance work or even investments that generate passive income.
Exactly. And it's not just about money. It could also mean cultivating relationships with people in different industries, learning new skills that could open up new opportunities, or even just being open to unexpected opportunities that come your way.
So it's about creating a safety net, but also a launch pad for potential growth.
Precisely. And this ties back to the idea of skin in the game that Taleb talks about. When you have multiple options, you're not as beholden to any one person or institution.
So you have more freedom and autonomy to make choices that align with your values and goals.
Exactly. And it also encourages you to be more thoughtful and responsible in your decision making because you're directly exposed to the consequences of your choices.
This all makes sense from a theoretical perspective, but how does it actually play out in the real world? Can you give us an example of someone who embodies this anti-fragile mindset?
Well, think about entrepreneurs, especially those who have had multiple successful ventures. They're not afraid to take risks. They learn from their mistakes and they're constantly adapting to changing circumstances.
They see failure as a learning opportunity, not a setback.
Exactly. And they often have a diverse portfolio of skills, experiences, and connections that allow them to pivot and adapt when things don't go as planned.
That's a great example. It makes this whole concept feel a lot more tangible and achievable. But what about those of us who aren't entrepreneurs? How can we apply this anti-fragile mindset in a more traditional career path?
Well, even in a more traditional setting, you can still focus on building a diverse skill set, networking with people outside your immediate department, and being open to new opportunities within your organization. It's about creating optionality even within the structure of a more traditional career.
And maybe it's also about taking on new challenges, volunteering for projects outside of your comfort zone, and constantly seeking opportunities to learn and grow.
You got it. It's about being proactive and taking ownership of your own development.
I love that it's about empowering yourself to navigate the inevitable uncertainties of the future. So we've talked about reducing fragilities, embracing randomness, and cultivating optionality. Are there any other key takeaways we should keep in mind as we try to apply these ideas to our own lives?
One of the most important is to remember that building anti-fragility is an ongoing process. It's not a destination you arrive at, it's a way of thinking and approaching the world.
So it's about being adaptable, resilient, and constantly learning and evolving.
Exactly. And it's about understanding that the world is complex and unpredictable, and that's okay. In fact, it's that very unpredictability that creates the opportunity for growth and transformation.
This is all incredibly insightful, but I think it's important to address the elephant in the room, the idea of ethics. I mean, if we're all just focused on making ourselves anti-fragile, doesn't that create a situation where the strong thrive at the expense of the weak?
That's a valid concern, and it's something Taleb actually addresses directly in the book. He argues that true anti-fragility can't exist without a strong ethical foundation.
So it's not just about individual gain, but about creating systems that are fair, just, and beneficial to all involved.
Right. And a key principle here is the idea of skin in the game. The idea that people should be accountable for their actions and bear the consequences of their choices.
So it's about aligning incentives in a way that benefits the collective good, not just individual self-interest.
Precisely. And this applies to everything from financial markets to government policies to even our personal relationships.
Can you give an example of how this might play out in the real world?
Sure. Think about the 2008 financial crisis. Many argue that one of the contributing factors was that bankers and traders were incentivized to take huge risks with other people's money, knowing that they would be bailed out if things went wrong.
So they had no real skin in the game.
Exactly. And that lack of accountability created a system that was incredibly fragile and ultimately led to a catastrophic collapse.
That's a powerful example. So in a truly anti-fragile system, individuals would be encouraged to take risks, but they would also be held accountable for the consequences of those risks.
Precisely. It's about finding that balance between encouraging innovation and protecting the collective from undue harm.
That makes sense. It's about creating a system that's both robust and ethical.
Oh,
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We talked about reducing fragilities, embracing randomness, cultivating optionality, and the importance of ethics. But before we wrap up, I'm curious about something. We've been talking a lot about systems and institutions, but what about the anti-fragility of the individual? How can we apply these ideas to our own personal lives?
that's a great question, and it's something Taleb addresses extensively in the book. He argues that individual anti-fragility starts with cultivating a certain mindset, a willingness to embrace uncertainty, to learn from mistakes, and to constantly adapt and evolve.
So it's about developing a kind of inner resilience, a strength that comes from within.
It is, and a key part of this is understanding the difference between the things we can control and the things we can't. We can't control the weather, the economy, or the actions of others, but we can control our own reactions to those events.
So it's about focusing on what we can influence on making choices that empower us rather than victimize us.
Exactly, and this requires a certain amount of self-awareness, understanding our own strengths and weaknesses, our biases and blind spots.
And sounds like this is where that via negativa concept comes in. Again, the art of subtraction.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not just about eliminating external fragilities, but also about shedding limiting beliefs, negative thought patterns, or anything else that's holding us back.
Precisely, and this ties back to the idea of optionality as well. By reducing our internal fragilities, we're freeing ourselves up to explore new possibilities, to take risks, and to embrace the unknown with more confidence and courage.
So it's like we're creating space for growth and transformation, both internally and externally.
Exactly. It's about creating space for growth and transformation, both internally and externally. Another key aspect of individual anti-fragility is the willingness to learn from our mistakes. Taleb emphasizes the importance of trial and error, of experimenting, taking risks, and then adjusting our course based on the feedback we receive.
So it's not about trying to avoid mistakes altogether, but about reframing them as valuable learning experiences.
Exactly. Think of it as gathering data points. Each mistake, each setback is a piece of information that can help you refine your approach and make better decisions in the future.
That ties back to what we were discussing earlier with the Lindy effect, doesn't it? Instead of being afraid of failure, we should be looking for ways to test our ideas and see what actually works over time.
Absolutely. And this requires a certain amount of humility, a willingness to admit when we're wrong and to learn from others. It's not about having all the answers. It's about constantly seeking new knowledge and perspectives.
This resonates with me, the idea of embracing a beginner's mindset, even as we gain more experience and expertise in our fields.
That's a great way to put it. And it's closely related to another key aspect of anti-fragility, embracing randomness and variability.
Okay, so we've talked about this in terms of systems and institutions, but how does that apply to our personal lives?
Well, think about your daily routine. Do you try to control and plan every minute of your day, or do you allow for some spontaneity and flexibility?
I think a lot of us fall into that trap of trying to overschedule and optimize every aspect of our lives. We create these rigid routines and then get thrown off when something unexpected happens.
That's precisely the point. By building a bit more flexibility into our routines, we create space for serendipity, for those unexpected encounters and opportunities that can lead to growth and new discoveries. It might be something as simple as taking a different route to work or trying a new restaurant.
So it's about breaking out of those ruts and allowing ourselves to be surprised by life.
Exactly. And it's about cultivating that sense of playfulness and curiosity that allows us to see challenges not as obstacles, but as opportunities for growth and adventure.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. It feels like we've only just scratched the surface of what anti-fragility can offer. But I'm already seeing how these ideas can be applied in so many different areas of life.
It's a powerful framework, isn't it? And it all starts with that shift in perspective, seeing uncertainty and disorder not as threats, but as essential elements of a dynamic and thriving world.
So if our listener is intrigued by this concept and wants to delve deeper, what would you recommend as a next step?
Well, of course, I highly recommend reading Nassim Taleb's book, Antifragile. It's full of fascinating insights and practical advice that you can apply to your own life.
And perhaps even more importantly, start paying attention to the anti-fragile systems and individuals in your own life. What makes them so resilient?
Yeah.
What can you learn from their approach to navigating uncertainty and change?
Those are great questions to consider. And remember, building anti-fragility is an ongoing journey, not a destination. So be patient with yourself. Embrace the process of experimentation and learning. And above all, don't be afraid to fail.
Excellent advice on that note. We'll leave you with one final thought. How would the world change if we designed our systems, our governments, our economies, our education systems, even our own lives to be anti-fragile rather than fragile? It's a question worth pondering. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into anti-fragile. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep embracing the unexpected.